Welcome to another episode of the Troubadour Show. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 5, or book 5 if you prefer, of the Iliad. And my version of this that I put together, of the Iliad, the translation I put together, I call this chapter the hero Diomedes. You might read it called different things, like the heroic moment of Diomedes. And we're going to dig into this chapter to help you get more out of this book. First, I want to do a recap of, if this is the first time you're watching it, you've missed the first 4 chapters, that's fine. You could stick around with this or go back to chapter 1 and, follow along with this video series. But here, where we are in the story, just a kind of recap, is Achilles has left the army of the Greeks. So the greatest Greek warrior has abandoned the Greeks because of a quarrel between him and the leader of the Greek expeditionary forces, Agamemnon. Then there is a duel between Paris, the Trojan warrior, archer Paris, and Prince of Troy. He's the one who basically initiated all the conflict by abducting Helen of Sparta, who is now Helen of Troy because he stole her from the Greeks. But the duel does not go well. Menelaus, who was the husband of Helen, is dueling with Paris. He's basically beating the crud out of this guy, but Paris is whisked away by Aphrodite, his goddess protector. She takes him back to Helen in the land of Troy, and they basically, hook up while everyone's battling. Then what happens right before chapter 5, we have the truce shattered. So there's a momentary truce. Remember, this is a 10-year war. And there's a moment of truce here based on this duel. And there's like a little tension moment. And Panderus, the Trojan archer, has kind of Athena whispering in his ear, and he thinks he can get glory. So he shoots at the Greeks. He hits Menelaus, but does not kill Menelaus. And that initiates the brutal war again. And the fighting starts brutally at the end of book or chapter 4. Then we get into chapter 5. Now we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail, and I'll give you a Greek word of the day, which I think will help you understand movies and action movies and Marvel movies and all this, something really deep and primal about human beings, and in particular, things that you might see on the internet all the time. You might see this as like the final stand or the last stand, or there's a very popular video meme with millions and millions of views that's always re-edited in various ways, which this is an early example of, where the meme is called something like the masculine urge to die in battle, in a final battle. There's that. So we're going to talk about that. Now, it doesn't originate here, but we're going to talk about it, why Homer does it better than anybody before and most people after him. So in chapter 5, the hero Diomedes, here's what we're going to cover. I break this up into sections. You can get my translation. You can get chapter 1 for free to see if you like the translation. I worked really hard to make this readable for you, for a modern reader today, to really get a lot out of it. And I have some guidelines along the way to help you get the most out of it while it still is a full translation of the Iliad. Here are the sections we're going to break chapter 5 down into. Athena's gift. Panderus wounds Diomedes. Diomedes slays Panderus and injures Aeneas. Diomedes wounds Aphrodite, a goddess. Hera and Athena intervene. Diomedes confronts Ares. Diomedes wounds Ares. Now, if you were to just pick this up and not read, I explain who all those characters are as you go, as does Homer. So it's in here. You will get an understanding of all these characters and gods and goddesses. So let's get started with Athena's gift. This is the very opening of chapter 5. Then Athena gave to Diomedes great strength and courage, so that he would shine among the Greeks and win himself great fame. She lit a fire on his shield and helm, like autumn's star, the brightest in the sky, which gleams when washed in ocean's shining waves. So did the flames shine from his head and shoulders. She sent him into battle, where the fight was fiercest, where both Greeks and Trojans clashed. That's the beginning of the chapter. So it's going to be an exciting chapter. And this actually leads us into the word of the day. So the Greek word of the day. That I think this whole chapter could be called the Greek Diomedes' Aristeia. Aristeia. That's your Greek word of the day. Aristeia means it's the best moment for a warrior. It's their greatest feat. It's the thing that if you were to write a song about them, you would write this singular moment on the battlefield. It describes the highest point of a hero's excellence in combat. It's a blazing sequence of kills and daring feats, divine inspiration when the fight is at its absolute peak. In the Iliad, there are a variety of these Aristeias illuminated. You could almost think of the Iliad as the whole story is the Aristeia of Achilles in a certain way, but it's deeper than that in the sense that you'll get Aristeias for Diomedes, you'll get a Hector Aristeia later, and you'll get a specific Aristeia moment for Achilles toward the end of the book, which we'll wait for that. So this word Aristeia, Aristos, is the root of it, and it basically just means best or excellent. So you've heard the word aristocracy, which means ruled by the best. That's where this word comes from. This is one of the commonly formulaic moments or sequences in the Iliad. And an Aristeia is very formulaic in the Iliad. It's formulaic in other places, which we'll talk about I want you to get a sense for this important concept, because you have seen Aristeia so many times, but you love it all the time. I promise you, it's one of those universal things that everybody loves to see in Aristeia. In this epic, the poet Homer is pausing to spotlight a single hero in a series of escalating victories, often with divine help. It builds suspense before the shifting of the tide of the battle happens. So right now in chapter 5, the Greeks are pushing forward. But if you remember the story, Achilles has abandoned the Greeks. He's begged his mother Thetis, a goddess, to beg Zeus, the king of the gods, the god of gods, to start allowing the Trojans to win. This will show that Achilles is needed by the Greeks. But we haven't gotten there yet. So this is chapter 5, and the Greeks are still having their moment. And this is going to be the final big moment before, in a few chapters, we'll start seeing the Trojans start to push back. And we'll see how Homer deals with that. So there is a pattern in Homer that is stressed in all of his Aristeia scenes. And although Homer did not invent the Aristeia, it was a very common thing in literature. And we'll talk about pre-Homeric Aristeia moments and post-Homeric Aristeia moments. This is a big part of Western culture, but really world culture as well. It's a part of warrior culture, and pretty much every culture has a moment when they are predominantly warriors. I think most cultures have that. So first is this preparation arming scene. So that's the beginning. And you kind of already saw a sequence of this with Diomedes. It goes on in the chapter. I can't read the whole chapter. You'll have to go to troubadour.studio/Iliad to buy my translation. But you'll have Diomedes basically arming and preparing for battle. Sometimes this happens simultaneously with divine inspiration support. And I'll give you some modern examples of this happening that you've seen over and over and over again. And you'll be like, oh yeah, that's an Aristeia. I know what that is. And now you'll have a word for it. So he gets divine inspiration support. A god usually fills the hero with courage or directly aids that person. In this case, Athena lifts Diomedes' courage and gives his eyes the power to see the gods on the battlefield, which we'll get into in a moment. There is an initial foray, rising action in this moment. So right after the scene that I read to you, Diomedes goes into battle and slaughters Trojan after Trojan after Trojan. And then the killing spree occurs often simultaneously. It's usually this moment of just absolute slaughter of his enemies. Then there is a turning point or a setback. So the hero's streak must end for some reason. It often is suddenly ending. He is wounded, he is exhausted, or a god intervenes to pull him back. So in the case of Diomedes later in this chapter, Apollo, the god of light, the god of sun, the archer god, like one of the greatest gods, basically pushes Diomedes back and warns him not to fight the gods anymore. And then there is an aftermath usually. Often the aftermath can be good or bad. It can be the turn, or it can be the defeat of an enemy. That happens a lot too. So what are some famous modern examples that you've seen? And I'm going to say that if you've ever seen an action movie, a Marvel movie, or any movie that has any kind of action, any kind of fighting, you have seen Aristeia. You have seen this moment over and over and over again. So, a famous modern example that is very reminiscent on purpose of the tradition of Aristeia is the Battle of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So you get a variety of these arming sequences, preparation and arming. You get Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. They arm themselves for the final stand. Aragorn gives the rousing speech to the men of Rohan. That is kind of the equivalent of what we just saw with Athena giving inspiration. So although we don't have an actual god in this sense, there is a kind of divine asking of God's help. And that's the next, after the preparation arming scene, that is the divine higher support that we do get. We do get that in the Lord of the Rings. So Gandalf has promised to return. His presence hangs over the battle like that divine aid. And it is kind of like divine aid. Gandalf, as a wizard, has kind of a connection to a higher power. That's what his power is. He's able to pull down these magical forces, which is the forces of heaven. So he has a kind of connection to that. That's the divine. He's kind of like how Athena in the Iliad is participating in the battle. So it's just a modernized version of that sequence. They just put it into a wizard and make him seem kind of human. Athena does the same thing. In fact, when the goddesses and gods come onto the battlefield, they never come to the battlefield in their real form. You'll hear it always taking the form of some warrior, where they fight beside a warrior and give him the courage. So it's through a warrior that they do this, through a human warrior. Then there's, in the Battle of Helm's Deep, there's an initial foray. So the trio and the defenders make their first successful counterattacks on the I don't never want to pronounce this, Uruk-hai. There's a killing spree. And in fact, they make fun of this in a very playful way that I like, where Gimli and Legolas keep score, cutting down dozens. If you remember that moment where they're like keeping score throughout. And then there's a turning point. The wall is breached. The fortress is nearly lost. Doom looms. And then just as all seems lost, Gandalf returns with the riders of Rohan. The tide turns and the heroes get their glory. I think one of the simplest, you see this in all Marvel movies, again, all action movies, like very simple action movies have this, every single movie has it in some form. It's the moment when you could think of it as like the hero goes into God mode. That's the way to think about it in a movie. You see this even in story like video games. So if you played my favorite video game, Red Dead Redemption 2, toward the end, where Arthur Morgan basically goes on this last stand, even though he knows that something bad's going to happen to him. I don't want to spoil too much of that, but he goes and he fights with, his godlike abilities. But a great example of this that's actually perfect in so many ways is actually Wonder Woman. So if you saw the first movie, Wonder Woman, there's a no man's land scene. You get a preparation where she removes her cloak and she reveals that she's kind of Diana, a kind of demigod, just like Achilles. She doesn't really pray to a god, but the way that the music swells, the way the camera operates, it kind of illustrates the divine support. She's all of a sudden framed as a goddess. Whereas right before that scene, she was, a close-up of her and it was more like she was a human. And then she's like on the no man's land. So this is World War I. So this land between the Allies, and the Axis forces, or the Germans and their allies on the other side. And there's this land in between them that you cannot pass through because you just have machine guns gunning you down. But she basically becomes this goddess. She goes into there and she's deflecting bullets, inspiring soldiers to follow in, and which is another important part of the Aristeia often is the inspiration for other warriors. And then, there's the heavy fire really threatens to overwhelm her. until the others catch up. And then there's the aftermath when she has actually won in that sense, or helped them to win. So that is, you see that in every single movie today that has action in it. I mean, every single movie has some kind of moment when, especially action movies that have an Aristeia, an excellent, the best of. That's what that is. Now I want to go through a couple of sequences of what this Aristeia has been before Homer and after Homer. So one of the best examples of a before Homer Aristeia is the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have the arming and divine support. Before battling Humbaba, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are armed with weapons and backed by Shamash, a sun god. And Gilgamesh is filled with divine strength, slays Humbaba in a furious burst of energy. He spares no mercy, even when Humbaba begs for his life, which then seals the moral downfall for Gilgamesh himself. And then there's an aftermath. You get in Sumerian epics, you get in the Baal cycle. What I think Homer does differently, Homer is writing about stories that have been told over and over and over again orally. So everyone he's talking to, when he goes out to a bar essentially at that time to speak and to sing the song of Achilles to all of these people, to all these Greeks, all the Greeks in the audience know all the stories. I mean, it's like going to a medieval 13th century village and church and telling the stories of Jesus and the Good Samaritan and Cain and Abel. Like, they know all these stories. This is all familiar. What he does with them is elevates it into grand art. The way that he repeats himself codifies the Aristeia into a certain kind of formula, and he uses it almost like a symphony. There's a symphony-like aspect to this that modern movies, if you see, for instance, I think another great example of Aristeia in a modern Marvel movie is Thor Ragnarok. So when Thor, the god of thunder, he's being defeated by his goddess sister, and they're at his home, and she's beating him. She takes his eye, is basically about to be defeated, and then he goes into this trance. He calls, in a sense, the gods. In this case, it's his father, the god Odin. And he arms himself. He does arm himself. Now, what he arms himself with, in that case, is not the hammer. He realizes that he's not the god of hammers. That's one of the things Odin says. Are you the god of hammers? And he's like, no, I'm the god of thunder. So the moments happens when he comes back, and there's even a great line about this where Thor's sister says, "What are you the god of again?" And then Thor goes in God mode, literally in this case, and he is enshrouded in thunder. She is blown off from him. He goes down in like this again, the shroud of thunder, and just decimates the enemy. And just without a hammer, just with his powers in his fist. And then he inspires the other people, the other warriors, to fight. Even warriors who we thought of as the enemy all of a sudden start to fight for him. So we get David and Goliath. That's an Aristeia moment when the young shepherd arms himself with a sling, invokes God's help, fells the giant in a single climactic strike. We see this in Rome. Virgil's Aeneid had this. Medieval Christendom. So again, you can go through every era, and they're going to have Aristeias, and we don't have time to do this, but you can study how each era, how especially a big moment became influential. So I think one of the things that medieval Christendom added or altered in this Aristeia moment is represented in a really great, wonderful epic war poem, a war epic called The Song of Roland. Now in this, the scene is Roland refuses to blow his horn. So he's up against he's up against some enemies. He's up against the Moors they're fighting. It's against them. And it's, the Christians versus the Moors, and basically Christendom is going against the Muslims. Roland refuses to blow his horn until it's too late. When he does, he fights a doomed but glorious stand against overwhelming forces. So the Christian knights, the paladin, if you've played video games often or read fantasy stories, a paladin is a Christian knight. His or Aristeia, he has courage and loyalty, but it's martyrdom that becomes a model. That is what, and you see that all the time in that masculine urge to die in a great heroic moment. That is actually not as Greek as you might think. The Aristeia in the Diomedes sense and the Hector sense is with some kind of hope that you will gain glory and honor and have great things happen to you. That's the stress, is the glory and honor. The stress is not on the fact that you're doomed. And you really get a sense of that when you go watch a meme that has millions of views. It's called The Last Stand. And I cannot tell you how popular this meme is. It must have billions of views in a variety of different ways because it's cut up for TikTok, for Instagram, for Facebook Shorts, for YouTube Shorts, and for longer feature things on YouTube, which is a knight who has been beaten. He cannot go on. He's going to lose. It's overwhelming forces. And he grabs his sword. And you've seen this moment. He grabs his sword and he's going to go forward and he's going to fight until he dies. And that is the stress. Now, the stressing is that he's going to fight despite his death. This is despite the fact that he's doomed to die. That martyrdom is what Christianity altered in the Aristeia. That is not what Diomedes experiences here. Diomedes experiences this as he fights and he pushes back the gods themselves. Diomedes wounds Aphrodite. It's true that he's eventually pushed back, but the fact that he goes into the realm of the gods and destroys them, and Diomedes does not die. So it's not about the death of Diomedes. And Diomedes was a great hero of the ancient Greeks. Just like Achilles and Hector and all these other people, and Agamemnon and Odysseus, Diomedes is one that we don't talk about as much today, but he is. But I want you to contrast. The whole point of this long rant that I'm giving you is that there's a big difference between the ancient Greek Aristeia, which is focused on the excellence. He has exceeded what's possible to human prowess in battle. And he's the best warrior. He's the strongest. He inspires the most. Now, in the Christian knight, they take all of that as well. So a Christian knight is the best warrior. He's strong. He's powerful. But they add doom. He's going to die. He is inevitable that he's going to die in one last stand. When I see The Last Stand today in 2025, that meme, the masculine urge to die in a final stand, that is a post-Christian view. That's the point I want to make, is that it is what Christianity has added, has altered in the idea, the image, the model of Aristeia, which has gone through all kinds of cultural understandings. So that's the medieval type of approach. In early modern England, if you want to see a great example of Aristeia, I think you could kind of see this in Henry V battle between the English and the French, or the Normans. And this is the St. Crispin's Day speech, followed by the English charge and overwhelming victory. Okay, so that was the Greek word of the day. That was the first section of Athena's gift. Now we're going to move into Panderus wounds Diomedes. Panderus is a Trojan archer. He strikes Diomedes with an arrow, but Diomedes prays to Athena, so he's kind of going into his Aristeia, who renews his strength and sharpens his vision. So I'm going to read a little section here. So Diomedes prayed, and Athena heard. She made his limbs feel light, his hands, his feet, and standing near, she spoke these winged words. Be brave, Diomedes, fight the Trojans now, for in your chest I place your father's strength, the fearlessness that noble Tydeus had. And from your eyes I lift the mist away, so now you'll see the difference between a god and man. But listen well to this. If any god comes down to test your strength, do not engage them, turn away at once. But if Zeus's daughter, Aphrodite, joins the battle, strike at her with all your might. With that, Athena left her mission done. So Athena, this is the Aristeia moment, the preparation, arming, and divine favor, takes about 3 or 4 pages of development. And during that moment, he goes into an initial foray and he kills people. So it's an exciting exhilarating moment. It's not a boring incantation. It's a great moment. It feels like, whoa, all right, we're ready to go. When Athena says that to Diomedes, this is after he's been wounded by Panderus. I skipped that part. I apologize. So Panderus shoots him and he recovers, and he gets a divine favor by Athena. Now, the next section is Diomedes slays Panderus and injures Aeneas. Now, there are more deaths on both sides, but it's mostly Diomedes going around and killing Trojan after Trojan. He struck down Astyanos. He pursued Xanthos and Thuon. And Diomedes struck 2 Trojan sons of Priam's line, Echemon and Cryomios, and so on and so forth and so forth. So again, this is that moment when the hero goes into battle and just decimates the enemy. The Trojans are not just faceless enemies. That's one difference between them and, let's say, the Helm's Deep, Lord of the Rings, where they're basically faceless enemies. They're Uruk-hai or whatever. They're not, embodied, full-figured human beings with their own thoughts and actions and desires. That's one reason why I think Iliad is so much better than so much many other types of literature. Even literature I really like. I like the Lord of the Rings. Diomedes is going through this rampage. The Trojan Panderus and Aeneas have a conversation. Panderus goes to ask Aeneas for help. He's like, I want your help to go and fight Diomedes. And he says like he made a mistake by leaving many of his chariots at home, which is in a village far away. So he can't get to him. And so he only relied on his bow, but his bow has failed him twice. So he has shot Menelaus and it didn't kill him. He shot Diomedes and it only enraged him and made him kill more people. So he says to Aeneas, let me fight with you. When I set out, my father said to me, ride forth upon your car and lead the Trojans with it in battle. But I would not hear, for I did not obey, though it was wise. I feared my horses would not find enough to eat if they came with me to the war. So I left them behind and came on foot, trusting in my bow, but it has failed me twice now. So he did not listen to the advice of the elders, and he is not doing well. And he goes on later, he says, it was an unlucky day I took my bow from its peg when I led the Trojans here, hoping to win great honor by my skill. If I return alive and see my home, my wife, and my high-roofed halls once more, I'll break this bow and burn it in the fire. It follows me like empty, useless words. I love that. That's great. And then Aeneas tries to inspire him. He says, don't speak like this. Things won't stay as they are forever until we face this man, both you and I, with chariot and horses hand in hand. And he goes on and says, come on board. Let's go fight this guy. So there's more back and forth. Diomedes gets involved in the conversation. They meet up and they're kind of facing off, Diomedes, Panderus, and Aeneas. And then I'm going to give you, since you already know this is going to happen, I'm going to give you the death scene of Panderus really briefly, just so you can get a sense for how brutal this book really is. This is Diomedes. With that, he threw his spear with deadly force. Athena guided it to Panderus's face. It struck him near the eye and cut right through the bronze point, shattered all his gleaming teeth, and sliced his tongue as it went through his throat. The spear came out beneath his lower jaw, so it comes in, I think, like this, right? If you could see me. The spear came out beneath his lower jaw, and Panderus fell lifeless from his car. His armor clanged as swift horses ran away, and there he lay, his life and strength both gone. And then some more happens. Diomedes then faces off against Aeneas. You're not going to defeat Diomedes, guys. This is important to know. He is like a god, right? He is in that heroic Aristeia moment. But Diomedes grabbed a heavy stone, a rock that 2 men now could hardly lift, and yet he swung it easily with strength. He hurled it at Aeneas' strong hip joint, right where the thigh bone meets the socket joint. I mean, think about the specificity of that, right? The rock broke through and crushed both bone and sinew. Aeneas fell down on his knee in pain, pressed his hand against the ground to stay, and darkness fell across his eyes like night. That's the end of that section. Diomedes wounds Aphrodite. Now, at the beginning of the next section, we find out that Aeneas would have met his death if not for Aphrodite, Zeus's child, who saw her son endangered to the ground. So Aeneas is the son of Aphrodite. He is very famous in the Trojan epic, the Trojan mythology. He cannot die at Troy. So this is important to understand about the Iliad, and I emphasize this all the time, is that the Greek audience in the 8th century who would have been listening to Homer knows that Aeneas cannot die. So Homer's trying to make it as exhilarating and exciting, even though you know that he has plot armor, as we might say today. Aeneas can't die, but you still want to make it exciting for the audience. And that's how he does it. He crushes him, but then he gets some divine aid and he's okay. Now, as Aphrodite is taking away her son, Diomedes spots her. Remember, Diomedes now has something special that no other warrior on the battlefield has. He has the ability to differentiate between god and mortal. So he can see Aphrodite in her own form. And that is a really important aspect to be able to fight somebody, is to be able to see them, right? So that almost puts Diomedes on the plane of an immortal god. So here's what it says here in the book. Diomedes pursued the goddess now, for he knew well that Aphrodite's strength was nothing like Athena's or fierce Ares. She ruled with love, but battle was not hers. He saw her there and hurled his mighty spear. It struck her hand and tore through her fine robe. Aphrodite fled in sudden fear and pain, and Iris, swift as wind, appeared to help. And it goes on, but basically Aphrodite makes it back home where she is healed because, again, she's a goddess, but she's wounded. She gets hurt. So Diomedes is so powerful as a mortal that he's able to hurt her. There's some banter back and forth, and then Zeus kind of jokes with her, saying, Zeus smiled and called out to Aphrodite, war is not for you, my daughter dear. Your place is in the realm of love and marriage. Leave battle to Athena and swift Ares. Now, Diomedes is really pushing forward. Apollo is going to start pushing back so that Diomedes cannot go too far and basically rip the fabric of the universe by challenging the gods and as a mortal. So Apollo says, step back, Diomedes, and know your place. You cannot fight against the gods themselves. Mortals and gods are of a different kind. The next section is called Ares Joins the Battle. So now Ares is going to join the battle and try to push back against the Greeks. So Diomedes is still kind of in his Aristeia, but there's going to be a stopping point to him. Something has to stop him at some point. Otherwise, he's going to decimate the whole Trojan army. He's going to go and knock down the walls of Troy. That's how powerful he is. But we can't have that happen in chapter 5. He's still got like 21 chapters to go through, right? And Achilles is the real hero. But, this is Diomedes' moment. So there's a very important character introduced here, Sarpedon. And you're going to hear his name over and over again throughout the series, throughout the book. So Sarpedon is a Trojan. He's a Trojan hero and a Trojan king, or he's the leader of a group of Trojan allies. And as he's fighting, he turns to Hector, the main fighter, the main prince of Troy. And he says to Hector, Hector, where is the courage you once claimed? You said you'd guard the town alone if need be, with just your father's kin and brother's aid. But now I see no sign of them at all. They cower like weak dogs before a lion, while we, your allies, fight upon this field. Look at me. I've come from distant lands, from Xanthus' river, far off Lycia, a town now bound to Troy by loyal ties. I left behind my wife, my little son, and all my wealth that others will enjoy. But still I lead my men and I fight with strength, while here you stand, not helping your own troops, not giving orders to defend our walls. Beware, or soon your city will be lost, destroyed by Greeks and all your wealth in flames. It's time you lead and show your strength, or else you'll see your city burn before your eyes. So in this moment, Hector is being reprimanded by one of his allies, which is a good reprimand. Like if you're coming there to support Troy and Troy's not even really doing what they should be doing, you should kind of give him some, prod him a little bit. Hector heard Sarpedon's words and bit his lip. The sting of truth had pierced him deep inside. We're back to Diomedes. When Diomedes saw the god of war, he halted like a man who stands near a flood and watches waves churn wildly in their foam. He steps away, fearing to be swept down into the torrent, turning back in dread. Then Diomedes called out to his men, my friends, you see how fierce and bold he fights, but do not fear. He's got the gods with him, and now it's Ares who fights by his side. We cannot stand against the gods, my friends, so let us fall back now and guard our ground. So the Aristeia is starting to fade, I think, a little bit. there's a lot more battles that going on. I'm skipping a lot of battles. So we're seeing like the Trojans are going, they have Ares on their side. They're starting to push back against the Greeks. The next section is Hera and Athena intervene. So Hera, remember, is the wife of Zeus. Athena is the daughter of Zeus. And they are on the side of the Greeks. They want the Greeks to win. But it's important that the battle between the gods is the battle between Zeus and the allies who are going to start wanting the Trojans to win. Why do they want the Trojans to win? Why does Zeus in particular start to lean toward the Trojans? Remember, this is because Thetis begged him and he gave the nod of his head, which is a universal decree that this will happen, that the Trojans will begin to win, just long enough for the Greeks to want Achilles to return to see his true value, because he is the most valuable warrior. Hera and Athena return to the battle, and I just want to point out this one little section so you can get a sense of how the gods actually play out in the battlefield. They don't really interfere directly as as just like all-powerful gods just striking down everybody with a flick of their wrist. They work within the mortal realm. So this is what it says. Assuming now the voice of Stentor bold, whose cry was loud as 50 men at once. So Hera assumes the voice of this Greek Stentor. And this is what he says, this is what she says through his voice. Shame on you, Greeks, you splendid cowards all. When mighty Achilles fought upon this field, the Trojans never dared to leave their gates. For all of them feared his tremendous spear, but now they fight beside your very ships. So this is a great moment of reminding us and the audience of how important Achilles is, that he is the greatest of all of these men, and that the Trojans for 10 years had not fought as far as they have. Even though Diomedes is doing great, they are making it farther and farther because Achilles isn't there. Diomedes confronts Ares. We get an interaction between Diomedes and Athena, where Diomedes reminds her of the promise he made. Remember at the beginning, he said, or she told him not to fight any of the gods. So in this Aristeia, he has been obliging and living by the credo of the goddess Athena. That's really important. That's one reason why it's lasted as long as it has. And when she confronts him, she basically tells him, why aren't you fighting Ares? Remember, when he sees Ares, he tells the Greeks to move somewhere else. Like, let's not fight that guy. Let's go over here. That's because he's listening to Athena. So this is what Diomedes says when Athena tells him, why aren't you fighting this guy, basically. Then strong Diomedes answered her and said, I know you, goddess, daughter of great Zeus, so I will speak the truth and hide it not. No fear holds me, nor any lack of strength, but I recall the words you spoke before. You told me not to fight the blessed gods, except if Aphrodite joined the fray. Then I would strike her with my sharpened spear. So now I hold back and warn my men as well, for I can see that Ares leads the fight. And then Athena tells him to take heart and to push forward against Ares. And she tells him to strike him. Now, the last section of chapter 5 is called Diomedes wounds Ares. So this is how powerful that he is. I want to read 2 sections of this, and that'll be the end of our video today for chapter 5. When man-destroying Ares saw them come, he left the fallen Periphas behind and moved to face King Diomedes' car. When they were near, close, face to face, first Ares thrust his spear across the reins, above where horses pull the sturdy cart, eager to strike down Diomedes' life. But bright-eyed Athena, with her hand, caught hold of Ares' spear and pushed it off, so it flew aside and struck the ground in vain. Then brave Diomedes thrust with his own spear. Athena guided it to Ares' waist, where belt and armor joined upon his flesh. There he struck Ares, tearing through his skin, and drew the spear back out. Then brazen Ares let out a cry as loud as could be heard if 9,000 or 10,000 warriors yelled in war. Fear seized the Greeks and Trojans at the sound. So loud he bellowed, mad for blood and war. So imagine that for a moment. What Homer's trying to convey is a godlike bellow comes out, and it's like 10,000 warriors screaming. That's what this is. Now he goes on with the imagery. We're going to skip to the end when Ares returns to Zeus and he says, look, Athena, Ares is basically whining. And he says, Athena's being mean, basically. Athena's being mean and not playing by the rules. And this is what Zeus says. Then Zeus, the gatherer of clouds, replied and cast a stern gaze at his wounded son. Do not complain to me, you troublemaker. Of all the gods who dwell upon this mount, I hate you most, for you delight in strife. You love to see wars and battles rage. Your mother's stubborn spirit lives in you, a will so fierce I barely keep it tamed. I think it's by her schemes that you are hurt. But still, since you are mine, I won't allow your pain to linger long upon you now. And then he, lets him get healed. So I just want to note the god Ares is hated not only by other men, because he's the bringer of pain, the bringer of grief, the bringer of strife, this endless, turmoil between two cultures. He's also even hated by Zeus. Even Zeus, even the other gods hate him because he only brings destruction. That's all that he does. And there seems to be no real good to him. And yet he's there and he has to be there and he's just part of the world. That is chapter 5. I really hope you enjoyed Aristeia. Leave in the comments below your favorite Aristeia moment in modern literature or movies or TV shows or whatever, where someone went into God mode and you get the hairs on the, on your arms raising every time you see that scene, no matter how many times you see it. For me, that Thor Ragnarok scene when he jumps down, like that always just gets to me. It's such a great moment. A lot of that's because of the music, but it's just such a great moment. And there's so many of those moments. This happens in Game of Thrones, all over the place. So what is it for you? Which one do you like the most? What's your favorite? What's the one that's most inspiring to you? All right, I'll see you next time.